Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwicton.
This is Merps. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are getting those 12s in Arena. We have some changes. Changes were made to the Arena this week. Let's talk about them.
Yeah, so we don't really know what changes were made to the arena because Blizzard didn't really tell us, but they told us some of it.
They did. So it wasn't just the sneaky in the cover of Nightfall changes. Here's what happened. On January 9th, they made a short blog post and gave an update. For the Arena,
it was a long blog post, but it was mostly about the single-player content.
Right. As for the Arena, they said there are, quote, some updates to Arena buckets, which we have yet to see or yet to confirm. But more importantly, they have adjusted the appearance rates, their words, of some individual cards available in Arena. And their goal is to ensure that each class remains as close as possible to 50% win rate. And this boils down to Hunters, Rogues, and Warriors having their average card quality lowered. Druids, Mages, Paladins, Priests, Shamans, and Warlocks have had the average quality of their Arena picks raised. And that's about as much as they...
So we don't know how much they raised each one by. And if you look at HS Replay, and you look at the HS Replay like win percentages beforehand, it looks like they raised them all by the same amount or something stupid like that, but like we don't know. So right now the classes that were raised and were doing well before, like Mage and Warlock, are now at the top. And the classes that were raised that were doing really bad before, like Shaman and Druid, are still not doing well. So, you know, I don't know what their magical formula is for how they do these kinds of adjustments, but they've done an adjustment, and I can't think that they're happy with it.
Well, if you just want to see sort of how they have been doing, or see the results of their changes and judge it in terms of win rates. Well, the number one class.
That's how they judge it.
That's how they judge it, right? So
they specifically came out and told us how they judge how well the meta is going.
Right. So on those terms, it seems to be going okay, right? Because Warlock, the new number one class, is at currently Sunday night. It is at 52.5%. And
how is that well? That's 0.6% under Warrior, which they felt problematic enough to adjust down.
It is closer.
That's okay. Saying, right? Okay, so
and it's closer.
They made a change. They changed it from 53.1% to what is this right now? 52.6. Like, come on, you got to do.
0.5.
If you're gonna be making changes, you can do better than that. This is, I mean, I'm not saying the Warrior was, doing terrible stuff. We had a whole discussion on this on last week's Lightforge about just exactly what the Warrior was doing to the meta, and it wasn't like that terrible as far as Blizzard metas go. So it's not like we're saying that the meta is overall like super unbalanced or there's no class diversity or anything, but this did not help things that much. This micro adjust by the numbers, by Blizzard's own standard of how to help or hurt the Arena meta, which is what they said in the blog post. We've moved things we've moved things a little bit better. Right?
Yeah.
It made things a little bit better
according to their criteria. Mm-hmm. So whatever criteria they have set, it moves them closer to it. Once again, we can heavily disagree on whether this is the correct criteria, and I think we could say a lot about that. But this is a change towards what they believe is balance, their definition of balance, right? And now we have Warlock's number one. I'll just break it down really quickly. The current rankings as of Sunday night. So we have starting number one, Warlock, then Mage, Warrior, Rogue, Paladin, Priest, Shaman, no longer dead last.
Shaman was never dead last. Druid was always dead last.
No. Shaman was last before the patch.
No. Druid was last before the patch. When we were doing the Shaman run last week, Druid was below Shaman.
No, but right before the patch hit.
Oh, right before the patch hits, it went down? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Druid was below Shaman for much of the like middle patch period.
And currently Shaman is number 7, followed by Hunter, followed by Druid. And you have this range of win rates with Warlock at 52.5% and Druid at 47%. So it's a delta of about 5%, which is fairly close, right? This is like
Yeah.
about as close as we have ever seen between the first and the last class.
And just a note, this is something like less than 1% better than where the meta was before they did anything at all right after the launch of Rastakhan. The patch made things worse in terms of the bottom, right? After the patch and the offering rates, the bottom kind of dropped out. So this patch patched up the bottom a little bit more, because Druid and Shaman may still be the bottom, but they're like higher now than they used to be quite significantly. Whereas the top only dropped by 0.6%. So it's not like the patch did nothing. But if you look at how the classes were performing before the patch and how the classes performed after the patch, you take away the 3 classes that got moved down, which, by the way, Hunter has been disproportionately affected on win rate wise, probably not on actual like how many good cards they get wise, but like people just don't adjust very well when you touch Hunter. You look at the classes that have been moved up, it follows the exact order that they were in before they got moved up. Right? It was Warlock Mage, and then it was Paladin Priest, and then it was Shaman and Druid. And they're still like tiered by those. So they all got a bit better at about the same percentages, while the other 3 got a bit worse at somewhat different, at least in terms of win rates differently. Because Warrior is now at 51%, which is still good, right? They didn't like totally like neuter Warrior apparently, and we'll find out. We're gonna do an Arena Coup Warrior afterwards. But Hunter is down at the bottom now, second to last at 47.6%. So I know right after this happened, you went and got a 12 win on Hunter. You also played a bunch of Hunter. What do you think about Hunter right now in this meta? Because they were number 2, quite like almost pushing number 1 for Warrior for like towards the last week before the adjust. So
they were.
Where is Hunter now if you're trying to play an aggressive style?
Okay, so I think before I talk about Hunter, we need to talk about the meta in general. Because Hunter right now, in order for me to give a good analysis, I think we should talk about where the meta is now, right? Okay, so let us begin there. After the Wednesday patch, what does the meta look like now? Because before the patch, if you guys remember that far ago, the meta was a lot of warriors and a lot of decks that could counter warriors. So it was warriors with the Super Colliders, Warpaths, Executes, Dragon Roars. It was these annoying warrior decks that grinded you out and always had inevitability, right? And if you wanted to push against them, you still had to fight through their taunts, their Tarn Lords, etc., while they were getting value with their weapons. And in response to that, most people responded by playing Big Mage and Big Priest, or they just played another warrior and then, duked it out that way. There was the alternative way of going super aggro like I did, but when you go to the actual meta, right, and I saw this, and when I was asking Shady and Collins as well, they saw this as well. They were just like, people just didn't play that way, right? People either didn't realize it, or they realized it and they didn't go that route, or they were just like, I'm not doing this. So the pre-patch meta was filled with really kind of oppressive and annoying warriors, and then all of these decks that said, okay, the way to counter them is to just be more controlling, have more inevitability. That was before the patch. Now, after the patch, what happened after Warrior, which was not win rate wise, but just sort of like.
So I would disagree with you on what was happening with the meta before the patch.
Well, I'm not, because you could play good mid range.
No, but I'm saying what I saw. What I saw was also a lot of mid range. Like no one was, very few people were playing Control Warlock because it was difficult to get going. There's a middle. I'm going to call it the middle patch. Okay, so you had the initial, the Rastakhan launch, and then you have the middle patch, and then you have the latest patch. So in the middle patch zone, Warlock was the number 3 number 4 like class. And just to take an example,
Mhm.
and Hunter was number 2.
It was number 2, yes, by
And
far.
neither of those classes played particularly slow. And Rogue was number 3, I think. And Rogue was not playing slower than Warrior either. So you have your top 3 classes after Warrior in terms of win rates on HS Replay, and none of them played slow relative to Warrior. I think they all play slow relative to how we like to play when you see them out in the meta. But none of them were doing what you were saying, which is what Mage and Priest were doing, which were lesser used, smaller classes. I think talking to Shady and to Collins probably skews your viewpoint a little because they're generally control players these days who play those kinds of big mages. But in terms of what I see out in the meta, I didn't see that many mages. I didn't see that many priests. There were as many warlocks as priests and mages. There were as many rogues as priests and mages. It was pretty balanced in terms of what people used outside of warrior and hunter. And more of them, and more successful ones of them, not just with me, but with the general stats given by HS Replay, were playing a much more mid-range game. So I totally
It's
disagree
interesting
with
that
that.
you say that. I can definitely see that. I did. So from my perspective, I saw a lot of the counter control, if I can call it that, right? The counter control decks. But you're right. I did see a lot of the kind of
Because like,
heavier
how do you
mid-range
counter control
decks as
with
well.
like rogue and hunter? You can't. You will never outdraw a warrior, even as rogue, and you will never outdraw a warrior, definitely not as hunter. What you do is a mid-range style or a flip the board style, right? You got to get at some point. Like, you're not going to win the inevitability battle with warrior, but it doesn't mean you have to like aggro rush them down either. So you can call that mid-range, you can call that combo, you can call that flip the board style, whatever you want to call that. That's kind of what was going on, where Warlock was doing a bit more zoo. Um, but still, none of those classes, except Warlock. Warlock is capable of going control, but I think a very small percentage of Warlocks win control because of how the offering odds were working with Demon Bolt and everything. And I mean, Demon Bolts are becoming oppressive again, but it's just the classes didn't have the capabilities. The classes that did have the capabilities were not doing very well. That's what I'm trying to highlight in this middle patch area.
Sure. All right. Sounds good. So that was the meta before this most recent patch. Now, what is the meta now after the patch? I've played a lot. I've also watched a lot of streams, and we can also just take the data that we have from HS Replay, and I think it paints a very strong, clear picture of, I'll call it the return of midrange. Not saying that midrange was ever dead at all, but whatever midrange was before, it is even stronger now. Because the number 1 class in which is now Warlock, they are riding on the backbone of one card, Demon Bolt. It is the card that is in the most decks, and it like you have the most copies of Demon Bolt in any single Warlock deck as well. And then Demon Bolt, which is a super strong removal, synergizes well with good early and good mid game, right? And then it becomes even stronger when you have minions on board to push face after you Demon Bolt.
It synergizes well with Zoo, which gets stuff on the board, puts stuff on the board. It all works together as a package for Warlock.
Definitely. So Warlock is really good there. Mage, I've seen become very powerful just with some strong minions, right? So their most common card is Blast Wave, but mages also win because they have these mid-range tools. Like their second and third most common cards are Amani Warbear and Dragon Ball Scorcher, right? Really, really good mid-range, kind of give you some initiative, give you some beef as well. Pyromaniac is their next most common card. So just solid drops that also provide initiative and card draw. So, even in your categorization of this meta, which had some already pretty strong mid-range, I would say that now we see even more mid-range game and stronger mid-range game, right?
So I mean, it makes sense. The strongest deck, the strongest class that nobody thought needed a buff was Warlock before the patch, and then Blizzard went ahead and gave it a buff. And Warlock runs on Zoo right now because of, like you said, the Demon Bolts, and that was the case before that. I had the most success with any class in last month with Warlock and Demon Bolts after they gave the offering a bonus. And part of that was to take down warriors who will put a giant taunt on the board, right? You take out their giant taunt, you keep pushing ahead, you get more tempo on the board. So you're only afraid of one of the warriors' many options, which is Warpath. And that really gives you an edge in that matchup. But now they got buffed for really no good reason. So they're going to be number one. These are, like, it's kind of a predictable thing, right? Like, you had a bunch of classes that were doing pretty well. You had one oppressive class. You take down the oppressive class, and then you take all the other classes, and you take the best ones among them, and you boost it even more. So now you got one side pushing down, one side pushing up, but if you keep them all relatively the same, Warlock's going to end up ahead. There's not even, like, great targets for Warlock to take down anymore. Right? Like, the Demon Bolts are not hitting giant things anymore the way they were in the middle patch. In the middle patch, you get a Demon Bolt, it's going to take down 6/6 and above almost all the time. But now, if the meta's moving more mid-rangey, the Demon Bolts are actually losing some of its value. But Demon Bolts still being an insanely under-bucketed card. It started off really under-bucketed, they moved it up a little bit, but it's still heavily under-bucketed. On our tier list, Demon Bolt is a 144, and Demon Bolt is in the 144, by the way, should be like bottom half of the first bucket, and it's in the top of the fifth bucket. Like, there's your problem, right? Like, if you're looking for what's happening with Warlock right now and why they are the best, it's because Blizzard hasn't fixed that fundamental problem that they had, and they actually boosted Warlock.
Yep. So Demon Bolt is the kind of meta-defining card right now, because it is the defining card in Warlock, and Warlock is the number one class. So, did you want to say more, or should I answer your initial question of where are Hunters right now, right?
Yeah, now that we've set up that everything's pretty mid-ranged, right? Like, Warriors got nerfed to the point that they're not oppressive anymore, and all the other classes, except for Mage and Priest, were pretty mid-range anyway. So you have a very small percentage of control decks now. You have an even smaller percentage of actual aggro decks now. So you're in a mid-range meta. Now let's talk about Hunter.
Okay, so before I answer everyone's question, I would like to point out that during this entire time, chat has been saying, like, poor Merps, Hunter got hit hard, it was a good run, stuff like that. And it's like, oh, like, well, it sucks for Merps. Hunters are so bad now. Okay, I'm going to give you guys what you might think is a hot take, but this is, if you break it down, I think this is the truth. Hunter is now in a better spot than it has been for the past 2 months. Take that to the bank, okay? This is your hot take of the day. And I'm serious. And I'll explain this in a second, because you guys are looking at the win rates and being like, that is impossible. How can a class that went from number 2 in win rate drop down to number 8 in win rate? And Merps, you're telling me that Hunter is in a better spot. Okay, so caveat number 1, I'm talking about aggro Hunter. If you're playing mid-range Hunter, nope, not going to happen. Your mid-range Hunter definitely needs some quality cards, right? If you're playing mid-range, that means you're playing out a little bit later on, which means your cards have to be on average a little bit better. Would you agree with this? Mm-hmm. Like, mid-range Hunter definitely requires, on average, your cards to be a little bit better, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I think it's hard to define quality. Like, it's hard to define quality, right? Like, what do you mean the cards to be a little bit better?
I think they mid-range Hunters, at least the really good ones as well. When you see those good decks, a lot of them take from, like, the first and second buckets. I'm not saying that but like aggro Hunters.
Okay, so you mean they need higher bucketed cards?
Right.
Yeah, I would agree.
Aggro
with that.
Hunters.
They need, like, mid-range Hunter runs on the bottom of the first bucket. Like, the bottom of the first bucket has the cards that you absolutely need for mid-range Hunter. Eaglehorn Bow, Savannah Highmane, possibly a Spellstone, possibly a Razor Maul. Crushing Walls is huge. Animal Companion, you can take her, you can live without it. But Jewel Macaw's kill commands, those are very, very, very helpful. Like, and a lot of those cards are cards that you can't replace. Like, you can't replace a Savannah Highmane with another card and be like, oh, it's basically the same. It's just not.
Right. And Aggro Hunter is fine with kind of crappy cards like Emerald Reaver, right? I
Mm-hmm.
take an Emerald Reaver. I'm really happy with it. It's a 2/1 that deals 1 face damage and is a beast. Oh, give it to me. So, why, even with the decrease in card quality, so number one, you can still draft an effective aggro deck. But number two, the reason why Aggro Hunter, remember, is so good is because if you look at the meta now, it is the meta defining classes, and number one and number two are warlocks and
Mm-hmm.
mages. What are their most common cards? And what is the archetype of these classes? Well, it's Demon Bolt warlocks. If you're an aggro hunter, you do not give a damn about Demon Bolt. You hope that they drafted the sickest mid-range Demon Bolt deck possible. When we saw warlocks as a counter to hunter, one of the reasons it was a counter to hunter was because Defile was, I think, the number 2 most common card
Yep.
in decks, right?
Yep.
But now it is Demon Bolt and then Amani Warbear, Shadow Bolt, Amani Warbear, Dragon Ball Scorcher, and then Defile. So Warlocks are primarily drafting Demon Bolt, and then they still have the Defile in there, but it changes the identity of the class a lot. And when I have been playing Hunter, so post-patch, I played 3 Hunter runs, 7, 10, and 12. And the 7, I got just beat by like really crazy stuff. So I'll tell you right now, in the 7 run, I got beat by 2 other Hunters, but they played Professor Putricide into 2 secrets every time.
2 different hunters did that?
2 different Hunters, Professor Putricided me, and then played 2 secrets on that turn to get 4 secrets. And I was just like, what?
You lose. You got comboed.
I got comboed. I can't believe the second. It was a different guy. I even remember the name. Anyways, not salty about this at all, obviously. But when I play Aggro Hunter now, I see that warlocks and mages, because they don't feel as pressured by the inevitability of warriors anymore, which warriors don't have that. They still have the dragon roars, but they don't have the super colliders as often, right? So they don't have as much value and as much board pressure as they used to have, which means all of this kind of extended mid-range or just mid-range in general decks are coming back, and they don't have that many tools to fight off the early game. So we just went through Warlock. Let's look at mages for a second. Mages, what cards do they have? That's the most common. Blast Wave, right? So on turn 5, they can deal 2 damage. It's a Holy Nova that doesn't even heal. It can give them spells, maybe. That's great, but it's not enough. And then, obviously, they have the Amani Warbear, Dragon Ball Scorcher, Pyromaniac, and then Flame Strike, Violent Worm. You see that these cards don't really stop aggro, right?
And
these are not the cards that stop aggro.
Like Warlock, a lot of Warlock's power isn't hurting itself, but Warlocks may heal. Mages don't even heal. Like, they may not hurt themselves, but you get them down enough and your hero power just finish them off.
Right. And Warrior is number 3. The whole reason Aggro Hunter was good was because I thought it challenged Warriors, right? That they were slow. And it challenged them even more so now because, like I said, Super Collider appears less often. Super Collider is one of those cards that could end your run, right? That had a chance to end your run. But now, their most common card, Dragon Roar, don't care about that. They still have the Warpath and Devastate and Execute, which kind of sucks sometimes, but
you don't mind your executes.
I do not mind those. And then it's Rogue, which had its card quality bumped down, right? And then it goes to Paladin. So I would say that the one that gives me the most trouble these days is actually Paladin, because they have the taunts, they have the heals, they have the annoying early game as well. But the meta, I would say these days, is even better if you're an aggro hunter. Now, why does Hunter suck in terms of win rate? It's because everyone, I would say 95, maybe that's even low, 95% of people got used to playing mid-range Hunter with all their baited arrows, all their crushing walls, and they just don't have that value anymore, but they play the same way and they get absolutely demolished, right? Just like totally demolished now, because if they kept on playing this way. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here and I initially thought, okay, well, I guess hunters are not going to be that great. But then you see where the meta shifts. And as I'm playing aggro hunter, I'm like, these guys are not prepared for me at all. They're just super not prepared for something like this. You know, they're teching against other mid-range decks. No one is really teching for the super aggro hunter. And I think before the patch, because hunter was number 2, even though you might think like, okay, these are all late mid-range hunters, the threat of hunters being that high made people a little bit fearful, right? It kept them a little bit honest. Now the hunters are number 8, and I've seen this just from like my plays yesterday and the day before. People just don't expect it. I think they're like mulliganing like wrong as well, and I just slaughter them. I just absolutely slaughter them.
Well, they have less hunters in the meta to worry about, so they're also going to just draft their decks to have less hunter tech. In the middle, in the previous patch, you always had to draft in a way that you could survive hunter, or your deck is not going too far, because there were a lot of hunters in the meta. Like, Hunter was number 1 in Constructed, and that always bleeds over into the arena. And Hunters did pretty well in the arena in that meta, too. So you're going to be facing decks that not only had the archetypes that were not, like, bad for Aggro Hunter, but, like, not food for Aggro Hunter. But on top of that, the way they're drafting and the cards that they select, they'll have more of an eye out to, like, stop, you know, hunter aggression. Even if it's mid-range hunter aggression, it's still slowing down hunter aggression. Now that's not there anymore. Like, aggro hunter is always going to be good, regardless of what they do to hunter, as long as 2 classes are not ruining their day. And the 2 classes, well, possibly 3. But let's start with 2. The 2 classes are Druid and Warrior. Possible classes are Priest and Paladin. In terms of other things with heals, Shaman gets in here or there. But right now, Druid is almost never seen and is very low win rate. Druid's always a class where, you know, if you're good, you'll get a higher win rate than HS Replay, like always, by a significant margin, because it's so much fundamentals. But still, it means you're not going to see them. And it's all about matchups, right? So, yeah, Warlock and Mage, especially with the offering bonus to those 2 cards, like you said, it's really pushing those classes into a direction that is good for Aggro Hunter.
Yeah, so if you guys have been playing good Aggro Hunter, and by Aggro Hunter, I already see people asking this. It's like, oh, how many 6 drops do you need? None. You don't need any of those. Go watch my Aggro Hunter video. But
like, if you're wondering why people don't play Aggro Hunter, it's because you have to draft in such a different way. And no one has drafted in this kind of way for like a really freaking long time, because aggro has absolutely like been like a very fringe archetype period in the arena for about basically since they started with the spell bonus almost 2 years ago, up until they got rid of the spell bonus, which was about like 5 months ago. So in that like 16-17 month period, aggro became kind of an afterthought. No one's used to playing it, no one's used to drafting it. On the other hand, you take something like Warrior, which has like a insanely stupidly tilted way of drafting, but towards control, people will do it. And not everyone will do it. I see people mess up drafting control warriors all the time. But enough people will try. They'll end up with a decent amount of control warriors if it's good in the at the top of the meta. Hunters, not so much. Just people aren't trained to do that. They find it really, really weird to draft really, really aggro. Whereas with Warrior, if you're like, oh yeah, so don't draft any 2-drops and just use your hero power on 2, they're like, yeah, okay, easy. With Hunters, you're like, oh, don't draft any 6-drops. I mean it. No 6-drops or above, and all 5-drops need initiative immediately. They're like, what?
Initiative or a really good effect, or severely overstated, or something like that. Right.
Like a hook, like not like a vanilla one or one that taunts or whatever. People like are very uncomfortable drafting that. Like, extremely uncomfortable. I had an aggro hunter go pretty far last week.
Pre-patch?
No, 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it was definitely pre-patch. Okay. But throughout the entire draft, I just had to keep being like, nope, not gonna take that. Nope, not gonna take that. And chat was like getting on me for doing that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Aren't you guys used to watching Merps Draft Hunter? I'm not even being as aggressive. My hunters are never as aggressive as yours. Yours really like does not give a crap about anything. I think it's like faster for the meta than it needs to be. So anyways, but I was still drafting very aggressive. I think I ended up with like 1 6 mana card that had like initiative or something. And chat was so uncomfortable with it. So uncomfortable. And this is our chat, right? Like our chat should be used to watching like very aggressive hunters be drafted. It's just that's not how anyone else drafts hunter apparently, and it's not how like people play hunter. And we've all been conditioned by the last 2 years to go a little slower with hunter. Whereas you draft like it's GVG, like more tilted than GVG because now you have a bucketing system that allows you to do that, right? Whereas GVG still didn't.
So once again, if you guys want to break the meta, like you guys can just follow this, and I'm sure a lot of you guys out there are good with Warlock, good with Mage. You can just play them, play well, and do well. If you want to break the meta, go watch my Aggro Hunter video on YouTube, play that way, rack up lots of easy wins. I'm absolutely serious. And the meta might shift. People might recognize this, but I don't think they ever will because there will never be enough people that play as aggressively as I do and as aggressively as I teach in that video.
The only way the meta shifts that way is if they release an expansion that's aggro focused. And then a lot of classes and a lot of playstyles go that way and people get more familiar with it. And I know you talked about it for Hunter, but you could really do aggressive playstyle for like half the classes.
I was gonna say I have another meta breaker.
Druids, mages, very good candidates for it. Rogues, even very good candidate. Especially whenever you get the classes that have their values kind of like generally toned down, and mages and rogues are always good for that. Druid kind of just has too many cards that buff everything at this point. That I don't know how you justify playing a control druid anymore. Yeah, but anything that can continuously deal damage to the opponent's face as a way to finish them off. And again, in this meta, druids are not in this meta, basically. That opens up aggro so hard, because no matter what the meta is, you talk to hunters, you're like, what deck do you hate facing the most in the arena? It's always druid. Since Classic, it's always been druid. You may think it's like warrior or priest because they can heal 2 and druid can only heal 1, but no, if you only heal 1, now you have a mage hero power. Like,
no, I would definitely say it was priest at times.
Okay, it was priest at times when they had broken cards that like stopped you cold. But generally, it's druid, no matter how bad druids are in the meta.
Right, druids have. I would say over the history, it would be druids. But priests have had the highest peak in terms of. There was a time in which I was hunter. I saw a priest. I'm just like, okay, they could just use 1 mana to wipe out 2 of my cards and like 4 to 5 of my mana.
No, I mean, it's just 1 card. It was just potion. That was it.
It was potion, but it was also how they were structured at that time as well, in terms of all of the initiative, all of the all the stupid stuff, right?
They have a lot of stupid stuff now too. Like priests, I don't think have any like fewer stupid stuff that they normally have, but their stupid stuff is more tilted towards like 5 mana plus. So it gives you a super aggressive style, like a lot of room to maneuver actually.
And this is how card games should be. As the game goes on, you allow more and more stupid stuff, right? That's fine. But when you allow stupid stuff starting on turn 1, and you would never play Potion Madness on turn 1, but starting on turn 1, that's when it's really stupid. But anyways, my second meta breaker tip is, if you look at Paladins right now, they're sitting smack dab in the middle at number 5. And they could fall to number 6 if Priest goes a little bit higher, which I think Priest might. But I think Paladins are another sort of meta breaker right now, because here's where they do really well. Paladins right now have really good card quality offered in drafts. You want your swords, you got your swords. You got your steeds, you got your Blessing of Kings. You still have your good 1-drops, you have your Outdoors. They just play the tempo mid-range better than any other class. They don't do the value as well as warriors or mages, and they don't have the removal that's as good as warlocks. But I think the matchup for Paladins right now is really, really good. Make sure you draft your Righteous Protectors, you're lost in the jungles, get your Mauls whenever you can. Argent Protector is still really good. I played 3 Paladin runs as well, and those went 11 wins and 12 wins. So I think people are once again playing a mid-range that is just a little bit slow. So you can take advantage of it with Hunter by going super fast, or Paladin by just snowballing. Because once again, Warlocks have Demon Bolt, which is single target removal. I just create a board and you can Demon Bolt, but I'm clearing your stuff out to make Demon Bolt expensive while at the same time hitting your face. For mages, Blast Mage is just not enough, right? It's not like I'm flooding out there with tokens and then you can clean it up and get other spells. So
what Blast Mage does is give you cards.
Right.
Like, so anytime you're playing a style that doesn't care if your opponent gets more cards, anytime you're playing a style that you're like, Naturalize is the best possible card for my deck, you're set in this against mages. So you have to worry about Warlocks by not having really big things. You have to worry about mages by not caring about card advantage. Like, this is the best thing in the meta right now. Like, I'm not like always 100% on board Merps's extremely aggro train that goes through any meta. Like, no matter what meta it is, he's just like, let's play aggro. It's gonna work, and it does work. It's aggro. It's a play style. It does work, but it works in like different like degrees, right? Like, if you're talking about like April, did aggro work? Sure, but I think you'd be hard pressed to tell people, oh, it's better than mid range and better than control, because it wasn't. But it works. You can play like that. You can draft like that. It's not like dead in the water or anything. But here now, like, aggro is better than anything else. It has a distinct advantage over mid range and control in a way that I don't think it did prior to this patch. And if it did, it was like very slight. And prior to the last patch at the beginning of Rastakhan, it definitely did not.
Yep.
So, but now this meta is really good for aggro. So take any class, make it aggro, and you will have, I think, a good amount of success. The only caveats are probably Warrior and Priest, which like just have too many control tools that for you to draft aggro, you need to like be like they've been micro adjusted. Like, Warrior's been micro adjusted down, not because of their aggro or mid range tools, but entirely because of their control tools. So they're like not adjusted the right way for aggro. So that's why if you try to do an aggro warrior, it won't work as well as it should, because that's how micro adjusts work, right? Like, you're talking about we talked about this before. When Blizzard balances Arena, they balance towards the best archetype or the most popular archetype of a class. And they don't give a crap about any other archetypes in the class. The other ones just kind of come along for the ride. So it will always have this result where aggro warriors are not going to be a thing because they're worse than control warriors, and control warriors were oppressive. Like, if any archetype becomes good within a class, all of its other archetypes will be very difficult to use.
Yeah.
So some classes are pretty balanced. Like, I think if you look at like a class like Mage, it's actually pretty balanced between aggro and control. But yeah. So this episode is kind of like how to break the meta. Next week we'll go more into how to go along with the meta, because I know a lot of people want to hear about like, oh, what is the meta? Oh, it's a lot of mid-range decks. How do I play like a mid-range and like outskill my opponents with mid-range, right? Like, because mid-range has a lot of decisions to make and they all have a lot of impact, and your decision making is going to come into play a lot. And so especially if you normally play control or if you normally play aggro, you may be like, oh, there's so many decisions, what do I do with all of these? We'll drill it down a bit about that next week, but we're going to take a little bit of time to settle into the meta. I don't think Blizzard's adjusting stuff again anytime soon. And if you notice, we haven't talked about buckets because we have no idea whether the buckets moved or not, because Blizzard said in their post the buckets were updated. Please see below for details. And then they did not provide any details. And nobody else, we have asked, knows whether buckets have been moved or not. So we're waiting for Arena Drafts to get us some data and see if anything's moved. Like, normally whenever one of these updates comes up, people will just make a post. It's like, oh, I saw this card with this card. It clearly moved a bucket. Nobody's done that. So I'm actually guessing maybe buckets didn't move and Blizzard just like said we updated buckets, or like they updated the buckets but they only updated like a handful of legendaries or like some other like, 7th bucket to 6th bucket stuff. or like just a couple of things, or none of the important cards, right? But well, if we get more info on that, we'll also talk about that next week. All right, let's talk about Card Good Bad. Card Good Bad is Sightless Ranger. We were talking about so Sightless Ranger is a 5 mana 3/4 rush overkill. Overkill being if it hits something with 2 health or less, it will generate 2/1/1s. So you look at the card and you take away its initiative, and your remaining body is usually going to be something like a 3/2 or a 3/1 with 2/1/1s, which is almost like a Grim Necromancer. So it's almost like a 4-drop after it does its job. The job that it's going to do is to kill some things with 1 or 2 health, which is why it's 5 mana. It works, right?
It works. It does its job. I think the rating for it is pretty fair because
as much as Rush is good,
yeah, as much as Rush is good, as much as the overkill ability is appreciated, a lot of times it's just a little bit small. It is helped out by the fact that these days there are a lot of just stuff floating around, right? You can find a 2/2, a 1/1, sometimes even a 3/2 to just hit into, and you're good there. But going to some of the comments made in our subreddit, I think quite a few people pointed out, it's like, well, even when it generates the 1/1s, Dragon Ball Scorcher is everywhere. And they were saying, this card would be a little bit better in a meta in which Dragon Ball Scorcher was not everywhere. Mm-hmm. And they both come out. So if Sightless Ranger comes out first, Dragon Ball Scorcher can come out afterwards and then just kills off the 1/1s. So I think that definitely is something to take into consideration as well. It is a good card, and it's a card that contributed to the initiative that we see in the meta right now, right? Before this expansion came out, you were saying how, we have a decent amount of neutral initiative, and Sightless Ranger is just one of those that, while not OP, gives the opponent player or any player really just the opportunity to respond in a small way.
Yeah. If you do the math on it, dealing 2 damage and getting 2/1/1s should be like 4 mana. So if you're really just like using a Sightless Ranger to, finish something off and get the 2/1/1s that Sightless Ranger doesn't live, it's crap. Like, I see people do it all the time, and I'm like, you better be really desperate to be doing that. And I don't think people necessarily internalize how bad it is to be using your Sightless Ranger like that. You really want this thing to survive. If it does not survive, it is bad, even if you get the overkill.
You want it to either survive or create a situation in which, if you look at the board afterwards, they have to trade something like decent into it, right? And then they want to trade because they want to protect their stuff. So that's okay too. But I do agree. I see situations in which people throw it into something. I'm just like, that was not worth it. That was just bad. Like on the board bad.
Yeah, it's not Baited Arrow, basically. Like, Baited Arrow gives you a 5/5. So, yeah, you deal 2 damage to something, it's fine. The worst, obviously, and everyone knows this is the worst, and they try not to do it, is if you deal 3 damage and you don't overkill it. You just need the 3 damage. So there's a couple of, like, desperation uses, but I think a lot of people aren't internalizing just how desperate and bad using it to deal 2 damage and generate the overkill is if it doesn't live. On the other hand, the flip side of it is it does live, but it doesn't generate the overkill. And I see people pass up doing this all the time. And I'm like, are you crazy? Deal 3 damage, get a 3/2 on the board for 5 mana. It's not just a 3/2, it's a 3/2 with overkill, so they have to kill it or else you're going to get your overkill anyway. That's crazy good. Like, I know it's not Flanking Strike, and Flanking Strike may have inflated people's idea of what deal 3 damage and then put a minion on the board is, but Flanking Strike is an insanely good card. Flanking Strike for 5 mana would still be a good card. And you're basically getting that if you are able to kill something for 3 damage, not get the overkill, but have your creature live. So, do that more with this, guys. Like, I don't see that happen enough. And I see people actually just, like, hold on to it and be like, oh, it's not a good use of Sightless Ranger. No, it's fine. What's not a good use of Sightless Ranger is killing off the main body just to get your 2/1/1s. That's the desperation use. Actually dealing 3 damage and keeping a Raptor plus alive, that is not a desperation move. That is a normal value move. And obviously, getting the value would be getting the overkill, right? And still keeping the thing alive. That would be bonus value. That would be the much better than 109 value. But if the card just said, like, hey, it's a 3/2 with overkill and has a battle cry that deals 3 damage, that'd probably be a 109 too. Like, for 5 mana. Because that's okay value. Bucketing wise, it's bucketed a little bit. I think it's bucketed a little bit higher for where it should be, so I tend not to take it anymore. I think they moved it up a bucket or something, because I know I used to take this card, and then I stopped taking the card. I'm not 100% sure on the bucketing history of this. I'm going to search it up right now to see where Sightless Ranger is bucketed. And yeah, it's bucketed in the bottom of the 4th bucket, which makes it low for a neutral card. Like, this is where Volcanosaur is. It's where, like, Scarlet Crusader, Mad Bomber, Violet Worm, Replicating Menace, Cube. Like, there's a lot of good cards in here that really outclass Sightless Ranger. So, generally, I would not recommend that this card be taken unless you desperately need some kind of initiative. Or, I don't know, you just got a bunch of bad options. Because there's cards below it, too. But yeah, I think it's such an interesting card. I really wish it was a little lower bucketed. Like, if it dropped one entire bucket, then it would be, like, definitely pickable. And I think it creates interesting board states, and it's a well-designed card. And it's kind of a pity that it's a little over bucketed, and so, like, you're just not going to see it a lot. It's a little bit over bucketed, but you're still not going to, you just don't see it as much because it's a little bit over bucketed.
Yeah, I will say that I have definitely recently, and even before then, not picked it as much. And you can see why. If I'm playing Hunter, I'm obviously not picking it. And in my mid-range Paladin decks, it is... I tend to focus on the late game board buffers or the early game board establishers. And the mid game, I just have stuff that helps me hold, right? Like beefy things. And while something like a Sightless Ranger is good for Stormwind Champion and Silver Sword, sometimes I just can't afford to take a card like this when something really meaty is there, right? And we do have the bucketing issue as well, where I look at it up against a card that I think is even better, and I'm just like, oh, I don't think I can afford to take it. So good card. I see it more a ton more from my opponents than I would take it for myself. Yeah. I'll say that.
And the chances that it causes me trouble is not that high. And I can only imagine how often it gets stuck in your opponent's hand. So it's a well-designed card, but usually what a well-designed card means for neutral cards is that it's not a very good card. And when it gets bucketed with very good cards, then it's gonna suffer. So yeah, not saying don't take it ever, but definitely think twice before you take it, because you're probably going down in value, so you better really need what it's providing. And it's providing neutral initiative, right? It's providing something. It's providing tokens, potentially, if you need more tokens. So there are certain decks that work with it, but more often than not, you're gonna be able to find one of your other two options is going to be either just better value-wise or even just a better fit for your deck. All right. Do we have a question from the GOAT?
Oh. We actually do not. Do you have one?
Okay. Well, let's talk about what other. So one of the things I know, and I people probably know this about you, but in case you don't know, Merps is furloughed because we all know Merps works for the government. And if you're wondering, like, where are these 3 Paladin runs that went like 11 and 12? He has a lot of time on his hands, and so he's some of these runs are actually off stream. But why don't you tell us a little bit about how you've been spending your time, while being on furlough, and I'll talk about a little about what I've been doing recently.
Gotcha. Right. So I haven't been working, and the days just seem to blend into each other. I often wake up and I'm like, what day is it? What year is it? I have no idea. But I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone, which is completely different from before, in which I sometimes would, or I not sometimes, I would only play when I was streaming. And I think this month I already have 30
Oh,
runs.
damn.
I
Wow.
no, I'm absolutely serious. I think
It's
I
the
already have
13th,
30 runs.
Merps.
Yeah, I know, I know. I'm pretty sure I already have more than 30 runs. Unfortunately, I did not track all of them. I've been tracking them recently. I tracked them at the very beginning. If I were to guess my average, I don't know, it would be somewhere in like above 7.5, definitely, but I'm not sure exactly where. Because in the middle, I also did I wouldn't say like totally crazy wacky experiments, but I'm obviously not just like picking the best class every
Mm-hmm.
time, right? So I think it'll be decent. Expect to see me on the leaderboard. Honestly, I have no idea where it is. I will start tracking now, and if I see a good opportunity, if my average is good, I will definitely make a push for it. As long as they don't, the government doesn't open up tomorrow, and I go back and I'm slammed with work.
Dude, the
But
government's not opening up this month.
I
I think you're
know,
safe. And
right?
if you're
But
listening to this and you're not American and you don't care about like international news or politics, the US government shuts itself down every now and then. This is sadly not exactly unusual. The length of it's a little unusual, but the government gets shut down all the time for random political reasons.
it does.
And this one's looking like a real long one because it's the one where Trump wants to get his wall built, and the Democrats don't want to do that. So I don't think this is going to get resolved like next week.
So this has already been the longest one in recent history.
Yeah.
We've already surpassed that, and I agree. I don't see any any resolution coming anytime
Yeah.
soon. So I will be playing a lot of Hearthstone. I will be able to provide you guys with a lot of it, and I've also been watching a lot of streams, picking things up. I do think I have a very, very good grasp of the meta right now, which is kind of cool, right? I think I can see where the meta is trending whenever I play. I'm making even better reads than I typically do, just because you just get a feel for the
Yeah.
game, right? You just get a feel for the game, how often stuff appears. I think my aggro hunter is even more refined. Just because I have been playing more. I've been watching streams. I've been going on streams. You guys might see a couple more co-ops. So Adwixon mentioned a co-op I did on Shady stream.
If you want to watch that, it's on Shady's YouTube channel.
Yes, definitely check that out. I also it's a co-op with Shady and Collins as
Mm-hmm.
well. Had a really good time. It was mostly the two of them teaching me super dirty control, and it wasn't even control. It was just worms. It was just violent worms, like tons of violent worms. So that's not control. That's just worms, like a worm deck.
It's not control. It's like just
It's not control.
largeness, just like
It's
fatness.
It's worms, just worms. That's it.
If you want to see Merps doing actual control deck, he has a 12-win priest up on YouTube as of yesterday. That was a dirty deck. That was a dirty like playthrough in which you would not. I mean, you would know when you watch it because Merps complains about it the entire way through. But otherwise, you would not know that he's an aggro hunter player from that priest deck.
Yeah.
So I know we talk a lot about aggro and mid-range and whatever, but we'll throw in a control deck on our YouTube now and then. Go check it out. I had a control warrior back in whenever. Yeah. Like we play control now and then. There's a control mage that I had. I don't know if that's up yet. But we got a good amount of deck diversity up there, and we've been posting a lot of 12 wins in Rastakhan, so it's been coming out at a steady clip of 2 per week, and it's going to probably keep that rate through the end of the month, at least. So yeah, check that out. Anything else you're doing besides Hearthstone on your furlough, or really just like eating, sleeping?
Well, moving to the new house on February 2nd, so I have to do some prep for that. But other than that, I've just been I've been cooking more. I've been trying more recipes. Just filling in the time doing other stuff. But that's kind of it. That's that. You guys might see some exciting Hearthstone news later on in the month.
Oh.
But I will keep that. Yeah, that's a tease. That's what we call in the industry a teaser. There you go, guys.
All right. I have not been on furlough. I've still been showing up to work every day of the week in case my boss is watching this. I've actually been playing a lot of Smash. Like, not like a lot of actually playing of Smash, but I've been doing some Smash research. I've been like labbing a little. Got my characters down. I think I pretty much settled on Palutena and Rob as my mains. They move in a nice, slow but not too slow. They have enough options but not enough to overwhelm me. I feel comfortable with them. And I'm like knocking on the door. I've been knocking on the door to Elite Smash, as in like being within 5 percentile of it since like basically when I got the game.
Week.
Yeah, since the first week. And the rest of the people are apparently improving at around the same speed that I am. And if you like, if you think that like Blizzard's not doing a good job with their ranking systems and stuff like that, oh my god, Nintendo! Just it could always be worse. Like every now and then, I'm like, oh, Blizzard, you could do so much with all of your stuff. And then I play another game, and like at least half the time, if not like 75% of the time, I'm like, oh god, why? It's like a major studio with a ton of money and a lot of people doing design. How does it come to this? But yeah, but either way, it's fun. Even if the ranking system is messed up, the actual like matches are very good. And if you've either been if you've been on the border about whether to get the game or not, it's entirely possible to have a lot of fun with no friends, just yourself, and fighting random people online.
All right, sounds good. That's what we've been up to.
Yeah. All right. The question from the GOAT is brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com. Thank you guys so much, especially the new patrons. We got quite a few new patrons in the last week, so thank you guys. Yeah, we'll talk next week more about the meta. I think this meta is going to last for a while. Like, I don't think Blizzard's... Because the last meta we knew was going to be a short meta. Because Blizzard, when creating that meta, announced that they're going to do micro adjusts in like a couple weeks. But this one, there's no further announcement. So I think we may be here for at least a month, if not like a month and a half, or like until the next like arena event or whatever. So it's definitely a good meta to learn, and it's a mid-range meta, very skillful, also very able to flex either to be aggressive or to be control and like get what you want out of it. Because if the meta is very aggro and you like flex to control, you just lose. If the meta is very control and you flex to being very aggro, well, you're in kind of a weird space. But this is the typical meta. I don't know how often it happens, but like when you theory craft, this is the meta you theory craft with. Something that looks very similar to this. So it's definitely a meta that's a good time to like learn your fundamentals, and a good time to learn how to deviate and, you know, push advantages. Like I think aggro is a very good way to push advantage right now with the current meta. Just a good time to be playing in the arena right now. All right, that's it for us. Until next time, this is Adwicta.
This is Merps. See you guys.